Hello and welcome to another podcast on expeditions. I'm joined once again by Arthur and Myzrael.
Hello, hello.
Today we want to discuss our expeditions ratings project, which went on for like a month or so, and where we rated on all of the different thousands of cards, 1,000 cards in expeditions, and also the ones not currently in expeditions. And as you can see here, we have 5 people in this project: me, Arthur Myzrael, Redman, and Shades Realm. And this list is public now. You can take a look at it and see our combined ratings on the cards and where we differ, our individual ratings. And also you can see in which bucket these different cards live over here. Today in this episode, we want to discuss the most controversial ones between us three. So we have excluded Redman and Shades for our discussion. We just want to talk about the cards which we ourselves rate differently. And we also want to talk about the best cards in editions according to our rating. And let's switch over to the game. The first card we have to discuss here would be Bone Skewer. Before that, does anyone want to add something to our list, our rating list, how we have done it?
Yes, I think I think I should say something about my rating and how I did them. I have two different ratings for two types of cards. Champions are rated by using Balco data and recent Balco data and adjusting with my opinions. So they're mostly from Balco data. When you talk about standard cards. I use Barco data because I think the most important part of champions is how good they are if you pick them in first and second pick. About the rest cards that are not champions, I rated them using my system that I used in Hearthstone to rate cards before new expansions mostly. When I have rating from 1 to 5, card with 1 is unplayable, 2 is the one that requires a lot of synergy to make work, 3 is average card, 4 is a strong card, and 5 is meta defining very powerful card. And then I rated cards from 1 to 5, and then I multiply them by 2 to fit the scale from 1 to 10. And after multiplying, I adjusted the rankings to choose one of the adjacent numbers from the result of the equation.
Yep, and my method, so I also differ in terms of champions and non-champions, because champions should only be compared against champions. They'll never take up a non-champion spot, and vice versa. A champion that's rated 2 may still be better than a non-champion that's rated 4. So they're not to be compared at the same rate. But what I relied on the most was Lore Guardian data, which I believe to be more accurate in terms of because it takes when the card is drawn rather than when the card is in the deck. I set myself a threshold for each of the ratings from 1 to 10. I basically envisaged a bell curve that the entire 1,000 card would fit into. And then I set myself certain threshold so that the top cards will be 10, and then once that threshold is hit, the next cards will be 9, and once that threshold is hit, the next cards will be 8, and so on and so forth. And so on for 1,000 cards, and then I've done some more personal adjustments based on my own play experience and kind of any sample size errors that I see, because maybe some cards like epics are played very rarely in Lore Guardian. Yeah.
Okay, I mostly rated the cards from my personal experience. In some cases, I looked at the data, but in most cases, I just looked at the individual cards without looking up ratings for each singular card. And I also rated the champions and the other cards differently. So, of course, a champion can hold more value than a usual card, but you always have to give up one of the 4 champ slots in your deck to get this to work. And yeah, I just thought about how good are those cards. I tend to record all of my games, so I went through my games and looked at my drafts, how good these cards performed, and which cards worked, which cards didn't work. I also didn't take in, I wanted my list to be independent from the meta. For example, right now Demacia is very strong and Bridgewater is very weak, so Bridgewater cards will be usual have a lower win rate than Demacia cards, and I just rated the cards from their pure value, no matter which region would be the strongest at the moment.
Yeah, on the other hand, my rankings are probably a little more dependent on the meta, but I intend to update my rankings when there's gonna be big meta shaking with expansions and stuff.
Yeah, that's also for all of us, I think, that we want to update our ratings if stuff happens and cards get changed, for example, so this will be an ongoing list and not just a one-time thing. Okay. Anything else you want to add? Otherwise, we can move over to the individual cards.
Yeah, I think it's time to start our to the bone discussion about the cards.
Okay, the first card, as you can see here, is Bone Skewer, and we will approach this by saying, like me writing down these ratings first so you can see them, and then the person who differs the most will get to speak first about the cards. Of course, C stands for Conan, A stands for Arthur, and M stands for Myzrael. And the first card we discuss here is Bone Skewer. You see it right here. And I rated it pretty highly because I think this effect is super powerful. Just a one-sided strike is so good. And like if you compare this to other cards, like for example, Wild Claws, this is also a one-sided strike effect, but it costs 5 mana, is slow, and the downside, quote unquote, for putting your own unit on top of your deck, that's just not a real downside in my opinion. If you compare this card to Homecoming, for example, it's just the same effect where you sometimes just want to save your unit and recall something of your opponent. On the other hand, if you have to actively recall your unit to kill something or to stop something, that's even better. Homecoming is 4 mana fast, whereas Bone Skewer is 2 mana fast. The main reason I can think of why you guys are so low on this card is statistics. Bone Skewer only lives in the Lurker archetypes, and the Lurker archetypes for Pike is just very, very underperforming and has like a 30% win rate in expeditions. So if you just look at the statistics, Bone Skewer will also have a low win rate because most people playing Bone Skewer will also play Pike. And I just think the card individually is very, very good, and have always played in my constructed decks that play Bridgewater. Like, this is one of my pet cards.
I think you forgot to count the mana that you spent on playing the minion that you're gonna use Bone Skewer on, because minion is coming back to the top of the deck and then to your hand, so you have to replay it. Then, and this means when you use Bone Skewer for 2 mana, you actually use Bone Skewer for 2 mana plus mana that you use for a minion, for a unit that you played with Bone Skewer. If you activate Lurk for a few times, Lurk for a few times, and use it on a 1 mana Lurk unit, it's probably gonna feel very good when you Shyvana with it. But this is the dream scenario, and I gonna agree with you that in this dream scenario, Bone Skewer is probably a really good card. But first of all, outside of Lurk archetype, this card is strictly unplayable. It's really hard to find low-cost cards that can use a strike and have a good positive effect from it. If you play it with the 3 mana 4/3, it's a 5 mana strike, which is okay, I guess, but it's not gonna hit very hard for a big unit, because then you need to replay this 3 mana guy, and also you skip a card. Your next draw phase, you skip a card draw, which is also very relevant, and we cannot forget about this. So I think the downside that you said that is called downside. This downside are actually huge. I think this is really big ones. This is something that not gonna be easy to recover from. Even if you get a really good scenario from this, you still probably gonna get behind because you spent 2 cards on and 3 mana in Dream scenario to kill a unit, and it's probably some kind of later in the game because you had to activate Lurk a little more. And if you spend Bone Skewer on bigger unit, like 8 mana or like 8 drop, then you have to replay an 8 drop and you have 10 mana strike. So this is not something that I'm gonna get behind. I think Bone Skewer is really bad. I'm willing to maybe change it to 3 potentially, maybe because there are dream scenarios, but it doesn't happen very often.
So I'm on Myzrael's side in that I also think Bone Skewer is very bad. If we just take apart the card individually, I think comparing it to Wild Claws in terms of valuing how much it should cost for a creature to strike another creature outside of combat, if we value that at 5, I think that's fair because we see Concerted Strike, maybe Bloody Business is discounted, so is Grappling Hook. So you get a very nice discount of 3 from 5 to 2, basically. However, the drawback that you're getting is absolutely huge. You're putting one of your creatures on top of your own deck, and the effect of that we actually see, which is Keeper's Verdict, which is Poppy's champion spell. That's something that puts an enemy unit on top of the enemy deck, and that costs 6 mana. It seems overcosted because I think what people dwell on a lot is that people think that the card will come back anyway. But like Myzrael said, this is actually card card neutral from Keeper's Verdict perspective, card negative in terms of card advantage, in terms of Bone Skewer, in that you're actually denying yourself a draw step because you're putting your card from play that you've already paid for back on top of your deck. So looking at the most recent mini expansion in terms of Ari and Canon, we saw how expensive it was to play a recall synergy deck where we're essentially going tempo negative in terms of bouncing our own creatures into our hand. But this is even more than tempo negative. It's both tempo negative and it's card advantage negative. It's value negative as well. Because instead of putting it into your hand, you're putting it on top of your deck. Means you don't get to draw the next card on your deck either. So all of that combined is that I feel like this is actually a pretty poor rate in terms of something that should cost 5, cost 2, but actually it costs you another -6 on the other hand. So overall, I think that's why it contributes to such a low win rate on both Balco's data and on Lord Guardian's data.
Yeah, maybe my one last counter argument, my dream scenario is not just putting a Theodore on top. My dream scenario is they target it with a Vengeance, and then I get a 2-mana recall my unit, or put it on top of my deck, and kill something. In general, I don't think this putting on top of a deck matters at all. You will draw a random card from your deck, and if it's just the one card you put on top of your deck, then it's just the same as if you would draw another 2-drop, or if you don't have any control over the top
And
of the
in
deck.
your dream scenario, you still traded 2 cards for 1 right now.
No? They target my unit with a Vengeance, and I
So
kill
you
their unit.
traded Bone Skewer and your card draw. So 2 for 2, I guess. 2 for 2, I guess, and probably tempo negative because I bet it's gonna unit is gonna cost something if it's vengeance. Even in your dream scenario, it's not really great. It doesn't look great to me.
Yeah, but if I kill something with it, it's going to be the same size as my unit. Like, my 4-mana 4/4 will kill another 4/4. And it's like mana equal, and then I countered the opponent's 6-mana spell with my 2-mana spell.
If your creature is big enough, I guess. Yeah, sure.
And
Which
even if
is
it's small.
understandable in terms of vengeance.
Yeah, but even if it's like small and they cast normally I wouldn't use it on a small creature, but even if I don't know, I have a set and I have a 3-drop and then I kill the set, put my creature on top, that's even worth it, I would say.
I
But
think
okay.
you might be underestimating how much it costs to not have your draw step because you should probably, I assume we all know how important adding draw a card would be. If you add draw a card to any card, it immediately is worth at least an extra mana, if not 2. So denying yourself that draw step, it's not just going to be a random 2/2. We're not sure what it is, but drawing a card or denying a card is worth quite a lot.
Yeah, but sometimes you put your good champion on top of your deck and it will be better than your average card you draw. It's like similar to the magic cards that allow you to put them back on top, and in some cases from your graveyard, it's better to put this like random 6 mana card on top of your deck than just drawing a random card. I wouldn't say this is strictly a downside.
I'm not aware of very many good cards that put your own cards from the battlefield that you paid for onto the deck so that you can draw it again.
But there are cards that you can recall for mana.
And as Arthur said, you see that Ari doesn't work in expeditions because it's really hard to get consistent good 1-drop to recall, because even 2-drop, even recalling the 2-drop ends up being too expensive. 2-drops are too expensive to combine with Ari. You have to have 1-drops to make Ari work. So you can see this. You have to be 1-drop.
Yeah, but Ari is bad because just recalls unit, she doesn't kill anything from the opponent. Like if Ari would always deal 2 damage when she recalls, that would be very, very strong. But I can see your arguments. Like it's fair arguments. I'm not going to change my rating because I still think this card is amazing. And I'm still hoping that we'll see it in some other archetypes at some point.
Okay.
Isn't it the worst card in its bucket?
No, it's not the worst card. It literally has like Lurker's Rift or however it's called.
It's the worst in Lurker's bucket.
No, it's not.
According
Ripper's
to
Bay.
Balco data.
What about Ripper's Bay?
Right, Reaper's Bay have 35.1 and Bone Skewer have 26.1, I think.
Yeah,
I
still think
use,
it's because
I
people
use
played in Lurk.
Tom's spreadsheet.
Like people played in Lurk and
But why this card is lower than any other Lurk cards? This is my question.
because it's hard to use and because Lurk is generally bad.
If lurkers are generally bad, then all of the lurkers will be generally bad, which they are, but this is actually the worst out of the lurkers. So I wouldn't say this is being dragged down by lurkers. If anything, lurkers is being dragged down by it, right?
Or Lurkers drag up Bone Skewer, because Bone Skewer is so bad that it's worse even than Lurkers.
This is a very theoretical discussion because I think nobody of us has ever played Bone Squirrels in Expeditions. Do you? I never did.
I actually did play Bone Skewer in Expeditions, and I lost that game, so I know what I'm talking about. In one game experience.
I've also faced it. It is an epic, so it doesn't come up very often. I have very little experience. But back when I think lurkers first came out, I did try it a couple of times and it was quite fun. It's very random, but yeah, I don't remember thinking Bone Skewer did anything too great.
But I just always put it in my Champion decks and it turns out quite good there. So maybe I'm a little bit biased, but I still think the card is good. Okay. But I think we have both said our opinions. And let's move on to the next one, Dawnspeakers.
Yep. So I think I'll
open it
take the
up.
lead. Yeah, I think I'll take the lead on this one. So Dawnspeakers I rated as a 9 out of 10. Mostly based, and you'll see this as a general trend for my cards as well, in that I do respect the meta quite a lot, and generally rate Demacia solid stat drops to be strong. The main reason why I think Dawnspeakers is strong is because it's backed up by the data. It has a very high win rate, and also in terms of stats, it's a 3 mana for a 1/4, which is pretty bad at the base of it. But as soon as if you get 1 proc out of it, meaning let's say you just getting 1+1/+1 off of it, then you're into kind of 3 mana 2/5 territory, which I guess still isn't great because that's a golden crush bot. But any more that you'll get, the stats just keep stacking up and up and up. And I've always had good experience with it because you can usually fit it into a kind of curve at some point. Obviously, it's not meant for turn 3. It's generally meant to be kind of put in on turn 5, turn 6 when you've already got something that's dying. And that's quite easy to do in terms of Demacia's Retribution bucket. And you can usually tangle yourself in combat with Demacia because they usually have to deal with your units, or you can challenge with them. So it's generally pretty easy to get that +1/+1 buff across the field from Dawnspeakers. We've seen this effect being strong, the +1/+1 to your whole board, permanent +1/+1 to your board being strong in Bannerman, in terms of Poppy, in quite a lot of cards, and the fact that this lets you do it again and again is very powerful. That's why I rated it 9 out of 10.
Okay,
Go on, go on.
So I'm like the opposite. I rated it 3 out of 10 because I think it's being a little bit carried by Demacia and by being in the Lucian bucket, which is one of the strongest buckets, I would say, in Demacia. And I just don't like its only other allies. So if you play this on turn 3, for example, you will have like 1 or 2 allies. If one of those allies died, it will buff one guy up. And if you play it in late game, it might work out even more, but then it relies on you being ahead. So you have to be ahead first for this to do anything. Then it doesn't even work just being ahead, but you have to be ahead and have your allies die. And if you have a lot of allies dying, you usually either are not ahead anymore or don't have a huge board anymore, from my experience. And I think it's just very hard to get both of these conditions together. First of all, you have to be ahead, then you have your allies dying, and they have to have no answer for the Dawnspeakers, and you basically can't play this in the early game because it just gets eaten by a Screeching Dragon, for example, and doesn't do anything on its own. You really need to be ahead, have a big board, and then have your units die. And I think that's just too many situational things for me. If my opponent can't kill my 3-mana 1/4 ever, then I would have won this game anyways. So I'm just not very big on this card.
I honestly have a big problem with this card. I'm not sure. My 5 is because I'm not really sure if this is some kind of average rating because I don't know. I played one run with Dawnspeakers and Dawnspeakers was good in this run. The main way that I activated the card was Fleet Elder Tracker with Challenger on 10-4 normally when I had Dawnspeakers, 2-drop, and Silverling Vanguard on the board, and something like Fleet Elder Tracker died, and I got +3/+3 in stats. But I think this is one of the better scenarios for the card. I think the card has some potential, but since it's epic, it's not shown too often. The other problem is bulk of stats. When Dawnspeakers in both buckets, both Retribution and Vault of Crowns are the worst Demacia card when we talk about win rate. So my honest answer is I don't really know how to rate this card. I'm not sure that there are things that say that this card is pretty good. There are things that say that this card is pretty bad. So I decided on this rating of 5 being the most average possible. The problem with stats also is that there are not a lot of them. I think there's a little more than 300 games only Dawnspeakers in Barco data, and this is pretty low amount to get any big conclusions.
So from one stat database to another, we can look at Lore Guardian data and we can see that Dawnspeakers has a win rate of 66%, which is incredibly high. That's game in hand win rate. And that puts it at number 44 out of about 700 creatures that there is. The fact that it's an epic means that you would normally expect it not to be used very much. But comparing it to some epics around it, so for example, Commander Ledros at number 41, its use rate is 0.02%, so you don't see Commander Ledros very much. At number 47, on the other end, you have Black Rose Spy, use rate at 0.01%. On the other hand, Dawnspeakers in between those has a use rate of 0.08, which is 4 times as much as Commander Ledros. That says something about both the popularity of Demacia and the strength of Demacia, and possibly the strength of itself as well. Because maybe the fact that it's stronger means that it survives longer, the survivorship bias, so it gets seen to be used more. So that's why its use rate is so much higher than a normal epic that you would expect. In fact, I'm looking at the epics right now, and no, K to the Arm is actually higher in terms, and so Cithria. Okay, but for an epic, its use rate is unusually high. So I actually trust that 66% win rate quite well. If it were much lower in the range of 0.01, 0.02, then I wouldn't trust that data as much. But the fact that it's actually quite a considerable use rate for an epic means I trust that win rate data.
Do you know, Arthur, if this counts the mulligan? So, for example, if I have letters in my opening hand, mulligan in the way, does it count this in hand or not?
I don't think it does. It has to be kind of seen in the hand, and mulligan isn't in the hand, basically.
Yeah, then it makes sense to me why Dawnspeakers is like higher on the list than, for example, Ledros, because nobody will keep Ledros in the opening hand, as most people will keep Dawnspeakers.
But then you're winning a game with Dawnspeakers and Ledros isn't coming into your hand.
Is there any correlation between card cost and win rate in epics in expeditions? Maybe this is what we should look for to check. I don't think that this should be, but generally cards that are cheaper are better because they can impact more games. But is there anything like that in Lord Guardian data?
So I haven't done the analysis into this, but I do know from Magic and 17 Lands data that a game in hand win rate actually biases towards more expensive cards, because a game in hand win rate means that it starts tracking the data when it is drawn into the hand. And with expensive cards, it is more likely to draw it if the game goes long. If you don't draw Ledros, it won't contribute to the data at all. It doesn't say that Ledros has won or Ledros has lost. It just won't contribute at all. So it doesn't count that. So the fact that Ledros was seen in the hand at all is more likely if the game goes long. And if the game goes long, then you're more likely to play your expensive drops. So if anything, a game in hand win rate actually biases slightly more towards more expensive cards.
Another thing I would mention is that LOR Guardian tracks from the whole population or player base, versus Balco only tracking masters. And I can definitely see this card being better the lower you go on matchmaking rating, because lower rated players will probably not value this card as much, or won't throw any removal at it, or won't necessarily challenge it, or also might block more, forgetting about this effect. But I think the higher you go and the better the players are, the less effect Dawnspeakers will have, because they will either just not trade unless they are forced to, or they will just throw some resources at it and kill it. I could see a correlation there as well.
I am not sure about that. I generally think all cards are going to be better when better players use it, and worse when worse player use it. I don't know if this is exceptionally skill testing, but I feel like I think we should be rating these for the general public rather than for Masters players, because I'm not even Masters. So.
You would be if you would play constructed.
I also don't not even masters, so I agree with Arthur.
Okay, so I think I can agree with that the average player will probably have more success with this card than I usually do. So like maybe I'm just bad. It could be the other reason with playing this card. But usually I just play it on turn 3 and then they play a Skishin Dragon on turn 5 and eat it, and then I lose. And maybe I'm just playing the card wrong. I can see that as well as a reason. Okay, and the next card would be another epic that we didn't agree on, and that is Unyielding Spirit. This card was actually the one card I lost to in my first expedition run. Second one. My first one was the second run I did ever. I faced in the final battle someone playing Unyielding Spirit with Victor, and I basically couldn't do anything against it and instantly lost the game. However, in general, me and Myzrael, I think it's like not that good. I have been at a 5. Arthur is at a 9. And Myzrael at a 3. So Arthur,
some of you guys didn't play during the open beta, and it shows. Because Unyielding Spirit is released after, and if your first lock was to it, then I'm guessing you weren't starting from the foundation set. So the reason why I rated it 9, and I do agree it's probably a bit high, but it's essentially a card that tests the opponent of, do you have an answer or do you need? And often if they don't have an answer, it's very difficult to deal with. The only way of dealing around it is kind of going wide and going wide. But the fact that this can be used in response to things like Vengeance, Challenger, makes it pretty flexible. The fact that it's been nerfed from being a burst speed is understandable, because at burst speed it really was very annoying. But it kind of combos well with anything in terms of Fiora to dragons to any challengers, as long to lifesteal. Anything that has some keywords in it, uh, overwhelm, it combos very well with. And as I said, it's essentially a test for the opponent of, do you have an answer? And although the answers has I guess increased over time, the answers historically had been kind of capture in terms of detain, maybe some bounce. Now we have obliterates as well, but they aren't very common. It's just kind of very hard to deal with unless you manage to go wide. And if they are spending that turn 8 mana to cast Unyielding Spirit, that means they're not too worried about going wide. They probably have a board which can take on can defend against a white board already. So that's why I think, just because of how hard it is to deal with, I rated it a 9 out of 10.
I rated in this as a 3 out of 10 for general reason that I rate cards that are expensive normally lower, because I expect from them more than from a card that costs less. There is these two cases that Arthur mentioned about this card. This could be situation when the opponent have the removal, and then Unyielding Spirit did nothing. You traded 2 cards because your unit and Unyielding Spirit for removal, for like Vengeance or something. And there is other case when they don't have it, but when they don't have it and you play when they don't have removal and you play Unyielding Spirit on a big unit, you probably would have won without Unyielding Spirit anyway, because you are normally ahead on the board in these situations. So I think this card is this big win more card that cannot really get you away from a tough situation, and this is why I rated it pretty low. I know that when it goes off, it looks great. It's very powerful. I lost this card yesterday. I played against Pantheon, but I would have lost this game anyway. Pantheon opponent was very ahead, and Pantheon was almost unkillable for me at that point. And then they play Unyielding Spirit, and I just pressed surrender without even thinking. But I think this scenario, when this card actually changes the game, when this card actually wins you the game, that you wouldn't win any in other situation without this card, is quite rare. And I would like to I would like my cards to have more impact than win more the game that I would have probably won anyways.
I can fully agree with that. I also want my 8 mana cards to be individually good. And for example, my Captain Farron is a card that always wins you the game, no matter if you're ahead or behind. This is my late game card of choice. And Unyielding Spirit, when it resolves, it's really, really strong. And like Myzrael said, it can be a little bit of a win more card, but you also have to count effects in, or the cases in where you just draw this and don't have a good unit to put it on. Let's say you just drew your typical curve, 2-drop, 3-drop, 4-drop, double 2-drop. Then you just have some random small guys and don't want to Unyielding Spirit them. And in some cases nowadays, they don't even have to find an answer immediately. Like almost every region has a way to get rid of this later on in the game. For Shadow Eyes maybe, but they can remove the unit immediately with Vengeance. And for example, Ionia can just recall it, Targon can obliterate it with a Invoke card, and there are just way more ways to deal with this. I can't take damage with exactly Minimorph. That's just, I think this was more powerful in Foundations. I have to give art to that. This was probably very strong in Foundations, but nowadays it's probably weaker in my opinion. I still think it's playable, of course. It's like this big win condition, especially in Fiora decks. But it's like a high risk, high reward card. I generally don't like that much. But just because it wins you the game, usually I still rated it at 5. Do you want to respond to anything, Arthur? Or
I think comparing to Farron is kind of unfair because Farron is apparently the best card in Arena, as everyone agrees. Um, I agree it's not as good as Farron, but the fact that this is fairly difficult to deal with is enough for me to raise it so high.
okay. So the next card is Yordle Explorer, and we are actually like Myzrael and I chose the same rating on this one. Can't find it because there's too many Yordles. Here it is, Yordle Explorer. So I gave it a 4, Arthur gave it a 9, and Myzrael gave it a 4 as well. So Arthur, what do you think about Yordle Explorer?
Yep. So this is a card that only recently came out and has already received a nerf. From my experience, it's obviously very a synergy heavy deck, a synergy heavy card in that you wouldn't play it in a deck that doesn't have very many Yordles. But given it's in a World Travelers bucket and looking at the World Travelers bucket, almost the entirety of Bandor City are Yordles. So the fact that this can give almost your entire deck +1/+0 is very strong. Backed up to the fact that it also has a very high win rate, um, uh, makes me think that this essentially is a synergy card that doesn't require too much going on before it starts being strong. And as I said, a 2-mana 2/2 isn't that far off the baseline stat of what you would expect. And if you manage to get 2 procs out of it, then I'm very happy with it. And the ease with which you can get those kind of procs when your whole deck is Yordles and you want to be going wide anyway, giving your whole deck +1/+0 is very strong.
So one card I would compare it to is actually the Arena Battlecaster, who gives your whole board +1/+0 on attack. It's not permanent, of course, and if your Battlecaster dies, it's a little bit weaker, but I still think the effect is kind of similar, and you can also play the Battlecaster later on, so it's also giving units that you played beforehand +1/+0 on this attack, and you actually just rated this card a 6. Did you compare these two together, or do you just think a Battlecast is weaker?
I did not compare these two together because I think they're very different. Yordle Explorer can stay in the backlines and keep pumping your cards permanently. And the fact that Battlecaster has to go into combat as a 2/2 makes a world of a difference. So I think they're very different. And the fact that Yordle Explorer, essentially, when you give the +1/+0, it can work on your Yordles on the defense as well. Yeah, I think it's a very different card to Battlecaster. If anything, the card that I compare it more closely with is probably Battlesmith. But there's more Yordles in World Travelers than there are elites in Demacia, basically. Well, more Yordles in Bandor City than elites in Demacia. So I do think Yordle Explorer is very different and much better than Arena Battlecaster.
Did you count those, that it's more elites than Yordles percentage-wise, or is it just guessing?
I'm just guessing, and I'm not saying it's the absolute number. I think it's the proportion. So if you look at Yordles over Bandor City, just counting the creatures, versus elites over Demacia, I just think over time there has been so much dilution in terms of Demacia creatures that aren't elite, whereas I assume there aren't too many Bandor Cities Yordles that non-Yordles in Bandor City, because it's a magical portal that only Yordles can get through, right? So I don't know what they will be doing there.
There's a bunch of random. We can count it out at some point. It would be interesting, but we can't do that right now. And to be fair, yeah, Arthur, you also rate the Battlesmith as a 9, so that's understandable. I think we both, like Myzrael and me, didn't rate Battlesmith as high, and so you can just value this effect. But I think Battlesmith is a fundamentally different card because it gives +1/+1, and this one health matters way more than this one attack. That's why I'm not that high on this card. So do you want to add anything to our Yordle Explorer?
Yes, I think before the nerf, this card was bonkers because of +1 toughness buff, which is a quite important thing. But since the nerf is only +1/+0, and this is this I think makes a pretty big difference. The two things that I want to mention about this card. One thing is its weird relationship with Bundle Commando, the most important probably card in Bundle City, because you want to play Yordle Explorer as soon as possible on the board, but you also want your turn 2 to be Bundle Commando because you want to generate Hungry Outcasts as fast as possible. And and even though when you started generating hungry outcuts and play them, you get value out of this and buff your board quickly. But turn two should be normally bundle commando in your bundle CD deck. The other thing is that +1/+0 buff is normally not something that is going to win you the game, even on most of the units, and you're looking for a big win condition to close out the game if you play Bundle City. So you're looking for stuff like Poppy, like Discovery Arena Mechacaster, like your Arms, something to actually buff your units and make a really big hit, one really big push. And in this one really big push that you want to do to win the game, actually this +1/+0 doesn't matter a lot. So I think it will be significantly better when giving +0/+1. But just +1/+0, I don't think is enough.
Okay, that's a good argumentation. The next card on our list would be the Molten Breath. I think this is one of the few Demacia cards that have not prismatic. It strikes an ally with Fury, strikes 2 cards, and we have to up one moment. I gave it. By the way, with our ratings, we said we had these cards are not completely in a vacuum, but if you have like some cards that work with it, like you have 5 to 10 dragons, so of course if you don't have no dragons in your deck, this card is terrible. And once again, me and Myzrael gave it a 4, while Arthur gave it a 9.
Yeah. So Molten Breath is a card that I have a lot of experience with. I think is a great card because it essentially works with one of the best archetypes in Demacia, which is one of the best, the best region. And even though it is also a high synergy card in terms of like how Yordle Explorer is useless without Yordles, Molten Breath is useless without dragons, and I have declined it before. The upside is just so much higher that I'm willing to take the downside risk. It essentially only just need one dragon. Almost any dragon is sizable enough to kill the 2 weakest enemies. And because it has Fury, it will get +2/+2. And if there's a Rune Dragon Guard, it will get +4/+4. It essentially does an effect which is unique enough that not very many cards do. So it is quite situational in the sense that sometimes their 2 weakest units just aren't very good and you aren't trying to kill them, but then you've got other things better to do and you can wait until Molten Breath becomes more usable. And as I said, although there are situations when you just not have a dragon available, um, uh, the times when you do have a dragon and it becomes invaluable in terms of getting an 2-for-1 and then some stats, it's fantastic. It's also backed up by some very strong stats as well. And yeah, overall, I think it's just a very strong finisher in a dragon deck. I would try to use this quite sparingly in terms of I wouldn't use it into very much open mana because obviously you don't want someone to strike in response to this. Remove your unit before the Molten Breath lands, in which case you're at quite a big deficit. But I'm sure there have been plenty of scenarios when people have played something and then gotten their play Molten Breath away. So I think there is always there's generally a time to cast it when it's relatively safe.
That's true. I actually this is kind of the biggest my biggest problem with this card, because you are vulnerable to just pass from your opponent if you don't do anything and don't spend your mana to have it up for Molten Breath. But also I read this card as we said for average amount of support, and I think if there is 10 dragons in our deck, this is actually 9 out of 10 probably, because if there is a lot of dragons, this effect for 6 mana is pretty powerful. But I think average expedition deck, even if you try to build up towards the dragons, have closer to 5 number, and you have to have at least 1 dragon on the board to make it work. So I think this card is not that powerful for these 2 reasons. One is the amount of dragons that your deck can account for, and two, its counterability from your opponent, concerted strikes and vengeance. Stuff like that happen, and you need to always account for. I think. Actually, to be fair, Bone Skewer would be great to counter this card. Honestly. Since even if opponents spend a lot of mana, still you have 2 mana answer to Molten Breath.
Yeah, an interesting card to compare this to is the Boomerang Blade, which we had similar opinions on. So basically, Myzrael stayed at 4 for Boomerang Blade as well. I went up to 6, and Arthur went down to 8 on Boomerang Blade. And my big problem with Molten Breath is, first of all, the archetype it goes into. So you have to have dragons, of course, but when you play dragons, you usually have a lot of stuff to do in the late game. Like you will have your Sweetgin Dragon, your Kadrigrin, 7 mana dragon, Echat Researcher. You will always spend your mana efficiently. So I would much rather have a single combat as an answer spell than a 6 mana slow spell, because usually when I have like 1 or 2 dragons on the board, I have 1 anyways, and we have 2 to 3 Sweetgin Dragons on the board and have a good target, and I will just take the game over from that point anyways. Just don't want this clunky 6 mana removal spell. One of the main decks I lose to with dragons is Teemo buff caps, and Molten Breath doesn't really do anything versus buff caps. Same with the LeBlanc. It kind of does something versus LeBlanc, but then LeBlanc usually has like Bloody Business and stuff. So, and also Frostbites is one of the biggest counters to Demacia in general, and this card makes you even more vulnerable to Frostbites. Not even just this big 6 mana remits. Vengeance, so just like a 3 mana Vengeance, a 3 mana Frostbite, a Flash Freeze, for example, a 3 Sisters, or if you have a smaller unit, Brittle Steel. And this card is just completely unplayable versus any Ash deck, for example. And even if you have your dragons on the board, then it will just play a Harsh Winds, play a Flash Freeze. And you can't really play around that well, because they will just have multiple Flash Freezes and multiple stuff that hits your dragons at this point. I just don't like the card that much in this archetype. I like the Boomerang Blade more because it is more flexible, and just think that dragons doesn't really need this 6-cost slow spell.
I think I definitely would choose Molten Breath than Boomerang Blade in Dragon's archetype, because it's 1 mana cheaper, and if you have dragons, many of your units, and especially your key units, are dragons.
Well, but Boomerang Blade strikes the strongest unit as well, so a little bit of a difference there. So I generally like striking the strongest unit and the weakest unit over the 2 weakest units.
That's fair.
Okay.
I think the difference there is Demacia and Shurima probably in mine. I also thought Boomerang Blade was fairly strong.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. If you include the meta, then Demacia and Molten Breath is just very strong to go for because of the Dragon archetype. But I think Molten Breath has one of the lower win rates in the Dragon bucket, if I remember correctly. So I think it's more that the Dragon bucket is pulling Molten Breath up, not the other way around.
On Lord Guardian, it's very strong. It's the 9th strongest spell out of 200 or so.
Interesting. Okay. Then we have a card where me and Arthur agree, and Myzrael is different opinion, and it's Omen Hawk, and we both gave it an 8, as it's, yeah, and Myzrael gave it a 3. So Myzrael, what do you think about Omen Hawk?
Yeah, I'm not. I don't know why you are guys rating Omen Hawk so high. I think that uh, it's basic line. So 1 mana 1/1 is not worth it. On definitely not worth it on one. Definitely not worth a card or spend or mana that you spend with. And then you get the buff. It's a +3/+3, but on 3 random units that you're gonna draw in the future. And these random units could be big units that you don't need really buff on, and they would leave without the buff anyway. And the dream scenario, I guess, is the moment when Omen Hawk buffs Starlit Seer, and you can play it next turn for as a 2 mana 3/4 or something like that to play to help your early game. I think fairly, especially the problem with this card also is that it's Freljord, so you don't have too many options to go initiative focused, and Omen Hawk would be probably better in such a deck to use this buff on smaller units, because +1/+1 on 1 drop is much more significant than +1/+1 on 7 or 8 drop. And Freljord have different win conditions and wants to do different stuff in the early game, I think, then buff your units and maybe get some value from some unit in the future. So I think generally Omen Hawk is not a card that is really worth a card, and I rate it as a 3, which is which from me is just explicit saying that this card is requires a lot of build around to make it good. And normally, I don't think it's really worth a card in your deck.
Just to clarify, Omen Hawk gives +1/+1 for the next 2 creatures, not 3.
Okay, 2, not 3. It's even 2. I think it was 3 before. I think I saw it as even a 3. Was nerf? I think was it nerfed?
It was never. It was the best 1-drop back in Foundations.
But was it nerfed? I don't remember. I don't think it was nerfed, right?
If it was nerfed, it might have been before. Let me look up. Before the beta, because I wouldn't have.
And I can give you a Myzrael that I, at first, before playing this card a lot, I thought it would be terrible as well. But it's just like, it's even easy constructed play right now in Ashley Blanc, for example, and in the Overwhelm decks was just these. I would say that the +2/+2 on 2 random units is more significant than on your 1-drop. Like a 1-mana 3/3 would of course be good, but a 1-mana 1/1 that gives 2 other units or grants 2 other units +1/+1 would be even better. And of course, it's a little bit delayed, but having a 6/4 Ash or a 4/3 Rhymefang, basically, that's just. These are stats are even better than just having them on your 1-drop that just trades for the 3/2, for example.
I agree that this card, that if I can choose or almost choose what is the card that Omen Hawk buffs, is better when I can't. So if I play constructed deck, I just build a deck, and almost all the units that get the buff are good with the buff, are just better with the buff. We don't have this luxury in expeditions. I think this is why I think this card requires a lot of build around to be good, and why it's so here in constructed. It's possible that it's good when it hits LeBlanc and I don't know, Brutal Hunter. It's probably really good, but I don't think we can have this option to consistently hit only good units in expedition.
But there's also a lower requirement in expeditions. Like every unit in expeditions is a lower power level, so a usual unit is just also a little bit better, I would say. But Arthur, want to interrupt you?
Yeah, I just looked it up, the patch notes. So no, it has been 2 allies +1/+1 since the announced preview patch. So it's never been nerfed or anything. I joke about it being a 1-mana 3/3, but effectively it has been for a long time. And yeah, at no point would a +1/+1 on one of my creatures be unwelcome. When I'm playing Freljord, I tend not to play creatures that don't want to tangle in combat, in terms of, 0/3s that give you mana. Maybe the only one I can think of is kind of the Rhyme Shaman, the one that freezes. Yeah, but pretty much everything else I want to tangle in combat, and even if I end up getting it on a 5-drop, if on turn 5 I'm getting a 6/6 instead of a 5/5, that is a huge boost in terms of tempo on that turn. And if I can get that twice in 2 subsequent turns, then that's really strong. So I've always had a good experience with Omen Hawk.
I think
It's
I would still rather have a one more card in hand rather than these buffs.
I think it's probably the one drop that I would want the most on turn 1.
Yeah.
The only thing I'm thinking of maybe like Fleet Feather Tracker, I'm a big fan of as well. Both of those are very heavily played during Foundations. But turn 1 Omen Hawk into turn 2 Omen Hawks was, uh, yeah, classic in terms of unbeatable.
Okay, so we have a champion finally. That's very interesting. And that champion is Viego as our next card. So Viego is like, I've played with him recently a lot. Not a lot, but a little bit more than usual. And I'm really still unsure how powerful he is. He feels really powerful. But let's first look at the ratings of the people. I gave it a 7. Arthur gave it a 5 and Myzrael a 10.
Yeah, so about Viego, when you check Balco champion data, recent Balco champion data, Viego represents top 5 win rate, losing only to Lux, Jarvan, Lucian, and LeBlanc, if I remember correctly. And since I rate champions based on first and second peak, this means Viego should be pretty high. In previous Balco data, in previous meta, when there were a lot of bundle city stuff, and this meta should have been a little harder probably for Viego. Viego was also high on win rate. It was in the second 10, I think. It was pretty high. And now it is top 5 because meta is really good for Viego. Since I consider meta a lot, I think playing Shadow Eyes in general, especially when you have Shadow Eyes champion that is strong and can win games against stuff other than Pantheon and Shyvana, because you beat Pantheon and Shyvana with just good removal spells from Shadow Eyes, like Dawning Shadow and Vengeance. This all combined, being great as a threat, great as a meta call, makes Viego very powerful, and it can be seen in Balco data. In Balco data, if you go into the meta when there is a lot of Pantheons and Shyvanas, Viego should be probably your call and your good buddy to help you get over the line. You probably shouldn't combine Viego with Demacia a lot because you should look for other playstyle. And another thing, more mechanical, Viego is quite easy to flip. It's not really hard to flip. And his effect is very powerful. It's only 5 mana, and this is something that I'm willing to pay for win condition. And if I can build good control Shadow Eyes deck that have Viego as its win condition, I think I'm safe to get very high in expeditions.
So if you look at the most recent Balco data, which takes data up to the 17th, the one on his test viewer, which refreshes every week, he's now down to number 14, so out of the top 5. That's still pretty high for a champion, but I still think that's higher than I would rate him because he's very middle of the pack. He's 44 out of 78 in terms of Lord Guardian data. I agree that Viego is very strong when he is flipped, but I disagree that it is very easy to flip him. 20 power of death for him to see on board. Um, I don't think happens very often. I have seen it happen before, and it usually forces concessions. And Viego is one of those champions that do force concessions when he flips. So I feel like it must be quite difficult for Viego to flip, and that has been my experience. Because usually what happens is he ends up being a backline champion because he doesn't have quick attack. He has fearsome, which doesn't stop him stop big creatures from blocking him, the ones that can actually take him down. So he often just ends up being a backline champion and sends other minions into to die for him and gets buffed that way. But usually there is some way that I'll be able to deal with an opposing Viego. So before 20, he sees 20 power of creatures dying, I can usually deal with the Viego before he flips. But I agree that if he flips, then it's very often game over.
I have not that much to add. Like, I feel that it's like in the middle of Viego leveling up fast and easy, or a little bit harder. And I think if you like build around him a little bit, make him not start as a 5/4 but as a 6/5. If you play like a Quadrum Mist before that, then he's really, really good. And he's just one of these champions that demands an answer. And it's again a champion that is better probably for the average player, because your opponents won't just draft 7 vengeances like I do and always have an answer ready. And if he isn't answered, he will flip in most decks in like 3 to 4 turns, I would say, just because of these mists and because of you just playing cards and trading. And funnily enough, I don't like combining Shyvana with Shadow Isles, but I like combining Viego with Demacia. Because just having these challengers and most importantly the barrier, Prismatic Barrier for Viego, just so strong. Similar with Ionia. I also really like Viego Ionia. And I gave him a 7 because I don't think he's like the strongest. But I would rather move him up to an 8 than to a 6, I think, after playing him a little bit more last week.
I like to play Viego a little differently. I like to pick a lot of removals, like you said, 5/6 vengeance, but with Viego, not against Viego. So I can play good control deck, and this good control deck should be able to handle popular stuff right now, like Pantheon, Shyvana, and stuff. And Viego should be good win condition against decks that generally don't carry good big answers, like aggressive stuff that you can play Viego to lock up the game. This would be my strategy. This would be my advice to play Viego. Don't force it into Pantheon. It's not gonna win you the game against Pantheon, but against like Bundle City, probably after you deal with the units, you can lock out the game to prevent impact over the top damage. This is how I would play Viego.
Okay, the next run has really surprised me, to be honest. Like, Chief Mechanist Zevi is the card we are talking about. Funny enough, we talk about a lot about epics, so maybe pick out like one non-epic here. And for that, like, I really want to hear why you don't like Zevi. So I rated this card a 9. Yes, 9, 7, and 4. And 7, 4. And like, what is not to like about this card? It's a 6 mana 5/6, which is very, very good stats. Like for PNC, it's usually the small stat region, just having a 5/6 on the board. It's just so much stats. And then when you draw a card, you give it fleeting and get a copy of it. If you have like a cheaper deck and play Zevi afterwards, you just draw 2 cards per turn, which is just insane. And this works with every card draw. Sure, you lose your cards if you don't play them this turn, but by turn 6 on turn 7, you should usually be able to play your 2 cards you draw. And even if you don't play your cards, you will just draw more in the next turn. And Zevi is just very hard to kill with this 6 health and is a very insane value engine in my opinion. So I really like this card.
I think this effect is not as powerful as you describe it. Especially as since it's on 6 mana unit. I think I maybe rated it a little too low because it can actually do stuff and win you some value games. So I would probably think about correcting it to like 5, but not really higher. This is a 6 mana. You have to pay 6 mana for the effect that is actually powerful, but you are looking for closing out the game at this point, I think, and not playing your value engine. If you manage to stabilize enough to be able to play value engine, you would have probably win the game with other cards as well. And this is how I look at this card as an average one and one that requires some stuff. It probably works the best on top of some kind of aggro burn deck, like probably Puff Cups. And this is part of the reason probably why you rate it as 9, because you really love this type of decks. But I don't think it's that good. I don't think it's this effect is this powerful, especially since especially since you don't play with yourself and you cannot just play fleeting cards. You have to play against your opponent, and fleeting card is not always the one that you want to play, and this makes it sometimes awkward to use Zevi.
So my experience with Zevi has generally been pretty positive. 6 mana 5/6 is enough to usually stabilize the board. It blocks very well. Surprisingly chunky, especially for a PNZ unit. And the fact that it gets you a lot of card advantage, even though sometimes maybe not exactly what you want to do, really help you shore up the game and helps you towards winning the game, which is enough for me. It's always pretty depressing to see a Zevi on the opponent's side and knowing that you can't out card advantage them until you remove the Zevi, and that's not too difficult, too easy to do with 6 toughness. So I've generally had a pretty good experience with Zevi, and I probably would have him even higher if it wasn't in PNZ. He wasn't in PNZ. A note on some of the reason why we're talking through epics is probably because they are seen the least in expeditions, even less than champions, and therefore we probably also have the least experience and there's the least data out there. So I don't think it's too surprising that we're discussing epics quite a lot. Some of the other things that we're seeing, Yordle Explorer and Omen Hawk. Yordle Explorer, despite being common, is very new, and Omen Hawk, despite being common, is only in one bucket, so people don't play with it as much anymore. So I don't think it's too surprising that we're talking about epics and other cards that we haven't had too much experience with recently.
Let's maybe talk about one last non-epic before we move to the actual good cards. And the next non-epic on the list, like the next one afterwards, would be Charm. We talked about Charm a lot already. So let's instead talk about Uzgar the Ancient. And a quite interesting ratings as well. I gave it a 6. Arthur gave it a 9. And Myzrael a 4.
Yep. So my experience with this guy, again, similar to Unyielding Spirit, is it's essentially tests for the opponent in that can they deal with it or can they not? If they can't deal with a 7/7 Challenger regeneration, then that will often lose them the game. This is easier to deal with than Unyielding Spirit, but I do still think it's a very strong finisher for Freljord. Challenger and regeneration is a very powerful combination, especially when paired up with a 7/7 body. So they really need to be able to use combat tricks or removal on it, but then you have your own opportunities to use kind of combat tricks or protection to try and protect it, because it itself essentially takes out a medium-sized creature every turn on the attack.
So I don't like. But I also think it's like weaker than Unyielding Spirit by a big margin, because like first of all it's a different region, so and it's a creature. Like I think I rated it a little bit higher even. It's just a very different card in my opinion. Because Unyielding Spirit is like demands one answer on one time, but doesn't win you the game on its own. But Uzgar is good on its own, so I generally like this effect more. Big problem I have with Uzgar is he's sometimes too small. Like sometimes I just want to kill a big unit, for example, the Great Beyond and turn 8, and he just doesn't do that. And or like it stairs and Viego that has like 3 buffs on it. So Uzgar just sometimes doesn't even deal with the most important stuff. And sure, you can take out multiple small health units over and over again, but does it really win you the game? Is it really what you want from your 8 drop? Just killing your opponents 3/3 over and over. If they have infinite 3/3s, they probably lose eventually anyways. And if they don't, and they would have won the game most of the cases as well. I think it's definitely a playable card, but I never was like, oh my god, Uzgar wins me the game here. It was just like always okay, a little bit better, but also expensive.
Yes, exactly as you said, Conan. This card doesn't win the game, so and I have to pay 8 mana for it. So it have to have really good effect for me to be happy to pay 8 mana for it. And this is the same for cards that are around on the list, like the Dreadway, Mirror Mage, and Dragon's Rage. They are all pretty expensive, and their effect are not, from my experience, impactful enough to win me the game. And so I don't want to rate them as high. I from my 8 drop, I expect to be really impactful, to do something crazy, to be Tiana, to be Arika, something like that. Not 8 mana 7/7 Challenger Regen is okay, but it doesn't really leads me to winning the game. I think so. This is the reason why Uzgar is only rated as 4 by me.
I agree that 8 mana is very expensive, but I think he's worth the cost, basically. And instead of taking out infinite 3/3s, if he takes out infinite 6/6s, that's a different matter, right?
Yeah, but which deck plays infinite 6/6s? Like that's not a real archetype.
Some of them plays infinite 4/5s. This
Yes.
is maybe something to consider.
And if your 4/5 always kills your other small unit, and then your Uzgar eats it, doesn't really do anything. I think just he's also very much easier to take down. Like you have multiple chances to take him down in comparison to Unyielding Spirit. So I don't know, it's a different card. Okay, so in the end, we also want to show you the cards we universally agreed on as the best cards in the game. So basically the cards that we all rated 10 together. And the first card is a card that I recently had. I only had one. I had one Captain Farron and double Lideros in my Spiders deck. That was a little bit expensive, but it was very funny to play Ledros into Farron into Ledros to kill them. But Commander Ledros was rated by us as a 10 out of 10. And he's basically just the 8-drop you want, because he's just so good. He's an 8 mana 8/8 with Overwhelm, so can push in damage himself. And if your opponent is under 8 life and can't kill you, you just immediately end the game. So it's basically a reverse Ledros. Ledros takes the first half, and Farron would take out the second half of your life total. And basically, whenever your opponent drops this card, you will single-handedly lose the game oftentimes if you took some damage in before, or if you don't have a good way to take out the 8 Overwhelm.
Yes, this is exactly the card that I'm happy to pay 8 mana for. It's the big guy that is 8/8 Overrun that is really threatening itself. I think Farron would be good, would be above 5, would be above average without adding cards to your hand at all, just as an 8 mana 8/8 Overwhelm. But then it adds to Decimates, which makes him broken, which makes him really powerful, which makes him great finisher, great finisher for Nagro deck, great potentially also option to end the game, great late game threat for control deck. Whatever you basically play, you're probably happy to see Captain Farron in your deck. So this is kind of a card that we are giving 10s here, and this is why we all agreed to 10 for Farron.
Did you know, Myzrael, that Farron got nerfed twice? Like, at the beginning of Farron's lifetime, he would discard your whole hand and give you a decimate for each card in your hand. And then he used to give you 3 decimates, and now he only gives you 2. And he's still so good.
Oh my god.
I think the transform your hand was a little bit different because technically it doesn't give you any, right? Give you any cards. You're not actually up any cards in there. It just means, do you want Decimate? And I think we all agree that Decimate as a card by itself is not a very good card. We on average rate it as a 2.3. So Decimate itself is not a very good card. So replacing your hand with Decimate wasn't very good back in those days. It was still decent, but there was some upsides and downsides. But ever since he got changed into Create 3 Decimate, he was insane in Expeditions, and even with Create 2 Decimate, he's still insane. And yeah, by consensus across the others, including Redman and Shades as well, he was the #1 pick for everyone. So exactly the kind of finisher that you're looking for in an 8-drop.
So the next champion we can cover and spoiler, which will actually be the champion we play in the next Friday's expedition run, and is Jarvan. Jarvan IV is also rated universally 10 out of 10. He's really, really strong. Just basically taking out an opponent's unit on an attack without even having to commit to action, without giving opponent any ways to react. Is also good, and if he ever flips, he basically takes over the game, just turns into a removal spell each turn, takes out a unit each turn, and is just so hard to deal with and so unstoppable.
Yeah, I think Jarvan is bonkers. Every part of Jarvan is so insane. Like ability to play him from hand without and open attack at the same time is huge. The opponent cannot put another blocker, so it's not only removing the biggest unit, but also one of your units from the board is probably gonna be easily hitting Nexus in the turn. Also, he's very easy to flip. Having your units survive 3 blocks is normally very doable. It often is flipped on curve, and if not flipped with the hit that he does himself. Also, after the flip, as Conan said, 3 mana. 3 mana, it's almost remove a unit because it is 7 with his hit. Is also very good. Like every part of Jarvan is insane, and this is the reason why it's 10 out of 10.
Yeah, I agree with everything. After he flips, he's insane, but he's also very easy to flip because he practically gives himself +1 proc on his level up, and then all you need is another 2, which isn't too difficult to do, especially in his archetype. He has a boat as well in terms of his father drawing him, which is also very strong, or according to me. And yeah, the fact that he effectively comes out on burst speed on the open attack is really strong, very unique. It's the most demoralizing thing in the world when someone open attacks you and you're like, why are they open attacking me? And then you look at the deck and they have a Jarvan and it's like, okay, he's coming down, and he does. So very depressing when that happens.
Do I remember correctly then when you attack with open attack and the opponent doesn't have a unit on the board, Jarvan comes online and just deals 6?
Yes.
Yes, it would just attack the Nexus.
Yeah, exactly. So another thing, Jarvan can also be used as a burst damage in some cases.
And to use that mode like 50% of the time, just dealing Nexus damage with him. I think like, if I have like a 2-2 challenger, I just challenge the big unit away and deal 6 damage instead of like keeping my 2-2. That's usually like, I don't know how reliable that is, but that's how I usually play Jarvan. And it's like a little bit of a weird move sometimes, because sometimes I just want to be slow and pass and wait for them to play a big unit, but then if I pass, they might pass back. So I have to attack, and then my Jarvan comes in and they like, yeah, big unit afterwards, but it just took 12 damage or 16 damage or something from the open attack.
I very rarely pass when I have the attack token, because I think giving up the attack token is too much if they pass back. So unless I'm very certain that I have inevitability, which is rare because I'm generally playing the more aggressive deck. If I have the attack token, I'd rather play some things in attack or open attack. And with Jarvan, it's very easy to open attack, so I wouldn't be too greedy with it and try and wait for something bigger, because if they know what they're doing and they'll pass back, then you've just skipped your attack token, so which isn't great.
Exactly, but if you like open attack and then open into nothing or something, or if they just have a 1/1, then it's also like a little bit awkward. I think I had like a run recently where I just open attacked into a Spiderling, and then Jarvan just took down a Spiderling because I had nothing better to do. It's also fine,
Yeah.
but not like the best value in the world.
Yeah, I would try and avoid those scenarios. In those scenarios, I would probably just play a different creature, even if it's not 6 costing. And in 2 turns later, you'll have the attack token again, and then by then maybe they'll have a big creature. And if they never have a big creature, how are they winning the game? So generally, I'll just play other creatures, 6 drops or less, when you don't have a bigger target, rather than risk passing with my attack token at risk.
I think I just had some space in my hand, like Flash of Brilliance, stuff like that.
Yeah, if that's the case, sometimes the correct move to do is to pass with the attack token, but obviously you're risking
Yes, of course.
your attack token.
So next card is
Yeah.
also Myzrael, sorry.
One more sentence about Jarvan. And also one thing that I really like to do with Jarvan is when I play Paint and Squire together with Jarvan. Paint and Squire is very often active in Jarvan decks because I keep Jarvan in my hand. In the mulligan, so I play Penitent Squire. I have Tattered Banner, the spell card that Penitent Squire gives. And before open attacking with to summon Jarvan, I just play Tattered Banner and my Jarvan have Challenger also. So this is something that I pretty often use as well.
Do you always keep Jarvan in your opening hand, or only if you have a curve already?
Always keep Jarvan in my opening hand. I play normally. I mean, there are some cases that I would not. When I see Mono Bundle City, Poppy, Tristana, I would probably not keep Jarvan in my opening hand if I don't have any other thing. But normally I just keep Jarvan always.
Interesting.
I would not keep Jarvan in my hand unless I already have maybe a 1, 2, and 3.
Me too.
Penitent Squire is not a reason to keep Jarvan for me. I'm looking for my early game curve. I can always draw into Jarvan. I've got 5, 6 draws to draw into Jarvan later if I shuffle them away. And if I don't, I'd still rather have solid curve than Jarvan, even though Jarvan, obviously, we agree is the strongest champion. So, yeah, we'll do.
Recently had a starting hand, Jarvan, Screeching Dragon back to back, and we would all say these cards are all great, but if you draw them all together and your opponent goes 1, 2, 3, you just lose despite playing the best cards in the game. So I would also look for some early game. Okay, then the next card is also the Demacia card Cithria, and I think we can just repeat most of the stuff we said already. Cithria the Bold, just as a very good payoff card. In turn 6 comes down, buffs your whole board, makes it hard to block. Fearsome is like, this is the only card that gives Fearsome in Demacia. Very unique effect. And just is a great finisher. Is even good if you don't have any units on the board, just a 6-mana 6/6. Can hold down the board until you find more units, and just an overall very, very strong card. And we also all rated her a 10 out of 10.
Yeah, just overall a fantastic package. 6 mana 6/6 is very solid, and the effect is just very strong. Giving +1/+1 and Fearsome effectively allows you to trade up on almost all your creatures and then bypass small creatures from chump blocking. Usually what will end up happening is the only use for their chump blockers would be to block Cithria, but then if you let Cithria live the attack rather than kill her, then you're just in for another attack in the next attack, which is not a good idea. So you generally want to kill her as soon as possible. So yeah, she's just very solid.
Yeah, mega strong effect, as Arthur said. +1/+1 fearsome, really hard to play against Cithria. Even I have problems with Cithria if I see her even in Path of Champions when bot plays it. So I know what I'm talking about. Cithria is bonkers. It's one of the best cards in Expeditions.
Okay, let's maybe look at some of the non-Demacia cards now. And the next card would be a failure card anyways, the Howling Abyss. popular thing to discuss about in our Discord. Is the Howling Abyss very good? Is it the best card in the game? And we were kind of close. So Arthur gave it a 9, and we both gave it a 10. Glad that I could convince you, Myzrael, that it's the best card in the game.
It's not, obviously, but I was like 9.5 for Howling Abyss. Actually, that set is on 10. I've maybe emotionally because the day I was rating cards, I had a drastic loss to Howling Abyss, so maybe because of that. But I think it's a very strong game winning effect. So you can have the worst deck in the world and then play Howling Abyss if you can hold on to this point and just win.
So I assume that means, Conan, that you think the Howling Abyss is better than Captain Farron.
No,
Oh,
it's more
okay.
fun.
Sorry, say that. What?
It's more fun.
It's more fun. Yeah, I definitely agree. It's a very fun fun card as well. I unfortunately don't get to play with it too often because it's an epic Royord. And usually in I guess Ancient Evil and Frozen Solid isn't too bad. But yeah, it is a very fun card.
Okay. Yeah, definitely can lose to it, can win to it. And
I think what's also interesting, maybe as a broader scale, is I am noticing certain styles based on our ratings. In that Conan likes value engines a lot,
yes.
kind of value engines because you value card advantage. Um, uh, so because you're more used to playing control decks, and because you are playing with solid removal spells like Vengeance a lot, you are probably less worried about cards like Uzgar because you just think you can Vengeance him away. Whereas, and I think Shades does the same thing as well. He seems to kind of value control cards more than aggro cards. Whereas I'm the opposite in that I'm very much about playing to the board. I want tempo on the board, so I value stats quite a lot. If you give me a 3 mana 4/5, I would rate that incredibly highly. 3 mana 4/5 with nothing, basically no other abilities or tribes, because I just think that is a card that you can often get ahead on board with. You can trade 2 for 1 with, just theoretically. So yeah, I value stats in early game quite a lot. But that does also mean that I'll have trouble against certain cards like Asgar, because I am not the one packing those vengeances. I'm generally the one playing the Screeching Dragons, so that's the difference. I think it speaks a lot to our playstyle, which is why I think it's great to have a whole panel of us on this, so that we can work out averages, so that it works kind of to the average population where some of the people will also be playing more control biased and some people will be playing more aggro biased.
Yeah, I find this very interesting because that's not like my usual games playstyle. I usually don't go for value or for long games unless it's Legends of Terror. For example, if I play chess, like the most aggressive chess player ever, try to rush you down. But in Legends of Terror, I just kind of enjoy value and long games. I don't really know why. Even in Magic, I tend to prefer aggressive decks over the slow and long-term decks.
I'm on Arthur's side in here. I also prefer initiative focus deck over control style deck. Really big reason is that games resolve faster, so I'm not gonna sit there and be bored for 20 turns to the point that maybe finally some of us don't draw our win condition. I rather go for the interesting board fights from the early game, and this is why I really like initiative focused stuff. This is why also more initiative focused cards and early game cards are rated higher by me. Am I the only one that rated one drop as a 10? Do you have any one drops, guys, as a 10s here?
I don't think so, right? Like you have the Saga Seeker as 10.
What did you put? Saga Seeker as 10?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Just yesterday I had an argument about people thinking Saga Seeker is unplayable. It just takes way too long and you can't win the game with it. We all agree that it's a good card.
Yep, I think it's a good card, but I don't think it's a 10 out of 10.
Yeah, I would also say it's a 9 out of 10.
What one drop has to do to be 10 out of 10, guys, then?
Hex
Oh,
Drinker would be my one drop of choice if I look at MTG. Basically, Hex Drinker is a card that you can spend mana on. It's a 1 mana 2/1, and you can spend mana on. And once you spend 8 mana on it, it turns into a 6/6 and has protection from everything, so it can't be targeted. It's unblockable and kills everything on its own. So it's a pretty stupid card. If you ever want to look at a badly designed card, look at Hex Drinker. So that would be what 10 out of 10 one drop would be looking like for me.
Very interesting. Has Hex Drinker ever been used in a competitive deck?
It's obnoxious in Cube. It's one of the most hated cards in Cube. And I don't really play Constructed.
Play with it. So off the top of my head, so as I said, I've got Fleet Feather Tracker at 9. I've got Omen Hawk at 8. I can't remember. Penitent Squire is probably high there. Yeah, I got Penitent Squire very high as well. But on the opposite end of Hex Drinker, have you heard of Ragavan? Nimble Pilferer?
The monkey.
Yes. Recently, who just got banned, I think yesterday or the day before or something. This shows how different in terms of our preferences. I have never even played with Ragavan, but I know he's very strong, and reading the card is very strong. He's a very tempo based card, plus card advantage, which is why he's so silly and been banned.
Basically, shortly, for anyone not playing Magic, Ragavan is a 1 mana 2/1 that on Nexus Strike nabs 1 from your opponent, and then you can also pay 2 mana to have him attack directly, like Jarvan would be just jump into combat. And again, he would on Nexus Strike nab 1, so basically a very high value engine. It's not exactly working like that, but that's basically summarizing the card pretty well, I would say.
But I think the more interesting thing is you think of Hex Drinker and I think of Ragavan. It speaks a lot about our playstyle. So
yeah, exactly. Very interesting. So yeah, I still would like to finish like the best card we rated from each region, and that could then be the end of the video. So there we have the Howling Abyss, and the best Banner City card we agreed on would be Bandle Commando, and Myzrael really talked me into it. I didn't like this card at first, but it's really strong.
It was actually the other way around, I think.
Is it? Was it? Did you not like the card or what?
I mean, when I started the game, I didn't know a lot about cards, and then I think I heard from you that Bandle Commando is bonkers. I started playing it a lot, and then I agreed to that. And I think it's that way.
Okay, it makes sense. It's definitely just a good value engine, good early, good late. So just an amazing card. The best Shurima card is next on the list, and it's Siphoning Strike. I'm also glad that everybody likes Siphoning Strike from us 3. It's just such an amazing win condition. I think it's the best win condition Shurima has. Just buffing up your champions, removing a unit. It's just so strong.
Yeah, there is separate opinion from me. I have Siphoning Strike is 9 and Merciless Hunter is 10, actually, in Shurima.
Okay, Merciless Hunter is like way lower on the list. Not way lower, but 29. I think we both... Oh, Arthur gave it an 8. What do you not like about Merciless Hunter, Arthur?
Well, it's a 4/2 now. You know that, right? He's been nerfed.
Yeah, but like, you think Uzgar is stronger than Merciless Hunter?
Yeah, I think so. Just because, Uzgar is harder to deal with. I think for their rate, I think there's not too much in it, and also I don't think I like Shurima as much as Bro would either. So
okay, you factor the regions in. That makes sense. But yeah, we both like this is the second card we agreed on. Siphoning Strike. And Ionia was, I think, pretty easy as well. The best Ionia card we came on was Greenglade Duo. This card is obnoxious in Constructed and even strong in Expeditions when there's not that many go-hards running around, pinging you for 1. And just can pump up to infinite stats and infinite damage.
Just today, 2 green light duos killed me on 5 when I played Demacia against Ionia. They played like 2 green light duo on 2, green light duo on 3, then just played units to buff green light duos, attack once, and then attack next time on 5. And 2 green light duo dealt 19 damage, and 1 spider dealt the final 20. So 2 green light duos killed me on 5.
For Targon, we have like a little bit of a split. So the best card we rated was White Flame, Moonlit White Flame, but that card is currently not in Expeditions. From the card that are in Expeditions, we came up to the Infinite. You could just like Infinite Mind Splitter as the first one, just this big epic dragon that always wins you the game if it comes down and double stuns units. I think we all agreed on this card being like very good. The 999, I think.
Yeah, like Mind Splitter, Saga Seeker, and Sunburst have the same
Exactly.
ratings.
Yes, Saga
Same
Seeker is the
average.
other one. Talked about this one already. Just the strong one drop that takes over the games, and then Sunburst, just this unconditional removal spell. That's basically a vengeance on steroids. Sometimes, but it is just slow vengeance, but oftentimes it's vengeance on steroids. I think it doesn't allow any death rattle effects or any buffs or something like that. Or Last Breath, it's called.
My favorite part about Sunburst is hitting Braum with Sunburst and seeing opponent buffing Braum to try to survive with it.
Exactly, that's just the funniest thing ever. Okay, then we have, what region did we not cover yet? Bilgewater. Then I think we have one of all regions, and the best Bilgewater card we all agreed on was Troll Hunters. This was actually a card I was tempted to just give a 10, because I just really think it's so strong, but I couldn't do it because Bilgewater is so weak right now. But I really think this card is in the top. Like I only think I rated like 6 cards with a 10. So I would say that Troll Hunters is like in the top 10 cards for me in Expeditions.
Yeah. I was hesitating about something like this because the only part that I don't like about Troll Hunters is that it dies to stuff like Vile Feast or Group Shot. So this is the part that I don't like about the card.
I agree that it's drawback in addition to being Bilgewater, but yeah, it's exactly the kind of card that you want, and unfortunately, it's in a pretty bad region at the moment.
Yeah, I think then we have one for everything: Battle Commando, Troll Hunters, the Masters like everything, Howling Abyss, Greenglade Duo, the Farron. No, we didn't have a PNC card yet.
Or Shadow Eyes.
Oh, Shadow Eyes, yes, correct. So I found Shadow Eyes, it's Vengeance. So it's not very surprising. So Vengeance just got buffed to 6 mana, now it's just insane. 6 mana killer unit at fast speed is very, very strong. Minimorph used to be not that strong in Expeditions, I would think, but Vengeance is universally agreed on as a super strong card, and I would recently, just like last week, I think I drafted like 6-7 Vengeances and worked that quite well. And I think I currently want to prove that Kindred is overpowered, raise her win rate, and I went up to 8 Vengeance, I think, once in my Kindred runs.
I beat 2 Kindreds today, so I fight the opposite way.
Okay.
I've also been beating Kindred.
Stop beating Kindred. Okay, and then we have PNC. I think we'll also have a tie, if I see it correctly, between the 2 removal spells, Thermogenic Beam. Just the 0 mana, deal as much as we have and kill something, and of course, Mystic Shot. And I think those are just both very good removal spells. I don't think we have a good big rating difference here. Just 9-9-8-8. So
yeah, I think I've had Thermogenic Beam as 9 initially in my first rating, but then when I went through the card, I changed it to 8. I decided that it's not as strong, and I think it's stronger than Mystic Shot. So I would rate it probably something like 8.5. So we can say Thermogenic Beam is the best PNZ card.
It's
Okay.
interesting to compare Thermogenic Beam to Sunburst, because at 6 mana, it's almost the same thing, except Thermogenic Beam obviously does anything from 1 to 13 as well. But do we really value Sunburst Silence that much, or is it that we like Targon more than P and Z? I'm just a bit surprised because the Silence certainly is
It's
useful,
silence.
Sunburst, but it isn't I don't think it comes up all that often. It comes up, although it's hard to tell because maybe they have buffs that would be buffing in response to Thermogenic Beam that Sunburst doesn't cover, and sometimes I guess Thermogenic Beam can kind of go over in terms of it use up 8 mana when it should have been using up 6, but there's ways you can get around that. There's only a small difference in the ratings, given that it's the best Targon card versus the best PNC card, or one of the best Targon card. But I thought that was quite interesting because I
Yeah.
think between anything, I kind of like Thermogenic Beam. I think the flexibility is worth more than the silence for me. So it might be, for me, the fact that I rated Thermo lower might have been just down to PNZ has generally a lower win rate than Targon these days.
Another
I
thing.
think
Okay, with Myzrael.
I like that Sunburst doesn't give flexibility to my opponents because if I play Thermogenic Beam, they can just buff unit and make it survive. And if I play Sunburst, they can't do such a thing. And this is, I think, this is a really big difference in that matter. I really also value Thermogenic Beam flexibility, but I think the silence option is more important and more impactful, especially since more cards are added to the game and silence starts to be more and more important to kill some hard to deal with units. If you see Anivia, I definitely want to have Sunburst. There's many units like that, and this is the reason why I value Sunburst much more than Thermogenic Beam.
And me as a late game person coming out again, I actually think Thermogenic Beam is less flexible the longer the game goes. Because, for example, on turn 6, you have banked up like 9 mana in total, and then your opponent starts his turn with a Hecarim, and you have to play Thermogenic Beam, and then you overkill him by 3. And that's just sometimes going to happen. Or if they're like at the late game and they play a Teemo, you have to kill the team before they attack, and then you have to beam it for like 11, and your opponent knows you have been tapped out. And the longer the game goes, I think the more flexible and the better Sunburst gets over Thermogenic Beam, although it's of course stronger in the early game. Thermogenic Beam, that is.
Sometimes you might want to get rid of a 7/7/8/8 as well. So,
But there are
I think
very
it's
little 7/7s and
appropriate.
8/8s.
Hmm?
There are not that many 7/7s and 8/8s, I think.
No, there aren't. But the fact that it can deal with it is pretty good.
Yeah, but you can't deal with a Pantheon, for example. Not when it comes down. So there's like a little bit of a different effect, I would say. Both have like cons and merits to that. Like this. Pros and cons.
Mm-hmm.
But a very interesting comparison, I would say. Okay, but then we have, I think, every region covered. Shogima was Siphoning Strike, Targon had like this split. And now you know the best cards in expeditions, according to the professionals. Okay, anything to wrap up this discussion? I really enjoyed it. I could definitely spend like 5 more hours just discussing with you why you think other cards are not as good as I think. It was really, really a lot of fun for me. And definitely hope that every one of the viewers also has good success with this rating list. If you have any questions, feel free to come to our Discord. It's linked in this spreadsheet as well, and to just take a look at or ask us why is this card good, why is this card bad, and listen to our opinions on that one.
Yeah, I also really enjoyed this discussion, these discussions about the cards, especially the first part when we actually trying to convince each other which opinions are more accurate. Therefore hope that these ratings are gonna be helpful for every listener that hopes to get better in expeditions. And as Conan said, for any questions, come join our Discord. We are helping with the drafts and helping you to get better and to get more usage of the weekly token and maybe play expeditions more.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed this podcast as well. It's taken us quite a long time, probably about a month, to get our acts together and rate all 1,000 cards. A lot of work into it, so hopefully people will find it useful. The controversial ones, cards discussion was certainly very interesting. And I also think the other thing was how we get an insight into our different playstyles by how we rate these cards as well. Maybe as a quick ending before the podcast goes too long, do you guys have a particular favorite card or a card that kind of speaks to your playstyle the most? Maybe I'll give you guys some time to think about that. I'll talk about mine. So I guess ever since Foundations, my favorite card, or the card that I think speaks to my playstyle the most, is Swiftwing Lancer from Demacia. I think he's very strong, and it's kind of the perfect mix between tempo and card advantage, because it's a 5-mana 5/4 that comes down. Usually, does essentially the thing that Screeching Dragon now does, get you to 2-for-1 in terms of taking down a 3/3 and then takes down a 5/5 or something. But then also gives you some card advantage on the back end when it dies. It gives you an elite, which are generally pretty decent as well. So I just really like the kind of inbuilt 2-for-1, 3-for-1 that Swiftwing Lancer does, and allowing me to dictate combat, which is where I excel at. So I think that's my favorite card and speaks to my playstyle the most. Do you guys have a particular card like that?
Yes. I also like dictating combats, but I like to do it in a little bit more sneaky ways. I really like flexibility in cards. I like to having options to adapt to my opponent, to game plan, to look for my outs, to look for different win conditions. This is why I enjoy the most cards that let me do a lot of different things, and I have to decide what usage of the card is the best. And this is why card that is my favorite, that says the most about me, is probably Twin Disciplines. I really love this when I can choose the different options, especially when there is like 3 combats and I need to choose different approach to either giving health, giving attack, or just going for burn. I really like this all decisions ideas, and this is why also I like many other combat tricks, because they make game very interesting.
I just turned Twin Disciplines Prismatic for you, Myzrael. It's had 100 lying around.
Nice, thank you.
Yeah, I like it. Should be obvious what my favorite card is, or what my playstyle comes down to. It's of course the Howling Abyss, just this zombie apocalypse scenario. I play ADC in League of Legends, so I just like sitting back, trying to survive, and then winning the long game, oftentimes, except when I'm playing chess for some reason. But it's just the card that speaks to me the most, this infinite value engines and this idea of surviving, and if you survive, you win. That's just more fun to me, and I think it's more fun in Legends of Terror because it has the least amount of variance in card games that I've counted so far, and it actually works, so that makes me very happy. I like playing big stuff and value stuff. I think the second card would also be Thermogenic Beam, because I really like flexibility. So I like Thermogenic Beam more than Sunburst from a perspective of game plan. But those are the 2 cards that would describe me the most.
I like Sunburst more in this discussion. I like my removal to remove things, and does it have any way to counter? Removal should remove, and this is the only role for removal.
But have you never had this soul-crushing feeling when your opponent, like you play a Teemo, your opponent moves a card forward and it's a Thermogenic Beam for 1, and you just like cry in a corner? That's what Shaman Bean can do.
So
I
just
don't play team, I don't know.
So I just looked up Myzrael's rating for Vengeance, and you actually rate that at 9, under Sunburst at 10. So you think Vengeance is stronger than Sunburst, do I?
Wait, I rate Sunburst as 10 and Vengeance as 9, right?
Yes. Oh, I also rated that higher. That kind of surprises me a little.
It's not surprising me at all. Sunburst is better. It's a better card, I think, than Vengeance.
No.
Okay.
I disagree.
Is that I rated it like that, especially with a new Vengeance when they're both at 6. But maybe that's something that I would change. I mean, Conan is the most consistent in that he rated both at 9, which is sad. I'm confused about why I rated Sunburst higher than Vengeance when I called out Myzrael for that. Anyway, I think it's fascinating that between the three of us, for our signature cards, we have chosen 3 different types of cards across 3 different regions. So yeah, it really shows the kind of variety that we can have in terms of playstyles in Runeterra, which is great.
Yeah, and I think that's great about this podcast, just bringing different people together, different opinions together. And of course, this tier list as well. You say you're more initiative focused, then you can go for Arthur's side. If you want to go for value and control, you can go for my ratings and just pick out the best or just take the average. And that should be very good for everyone. So, thank you all for joining and for watching. Thanks to Myzrael and Arthur for taking the time to make this list with me and for joining today the podcast. And check out our Discord. And yeah, have a nice week.
Thanks for having me. Have a nice week. Play more expeditions as always.
Thanks. Bye-bye.